All right, let's begin our exploration of the sources we have on just a profoundly difficult and tragic case out of Brandon, Mississippi. We're going to be examining the murder of Ashley Smiley and the trial of her daughter, Carly Madison Gregg.
And right at the top, it's so important to acknowledge the seriousness here. Ashley Nicole Smiley was a 40-year-old math teacher, a central figure in her family and community, and her life was.
Yeah.
It was just cut tragically short. Our entire discussion of these facts is done with real sympathy for her family and, the trauma they've had to endure.
Absolutely. Our goal today for you is to really meticulously go through the timeline from the source materials we have. We'll analyze the psychological context, which was the entire foundation of the distance case, and then break down the specific legal standards in Mississippi that led to, well, such a severe outcome.
And we should establish the core facts right away. This all happened on March 19, 2024 at the family home.
The victims were Ashley Smiley, who was killed, and her husband, Heath Smiley, who was also shot and injured. The perpetrator was their daughter, Carly Madison Gregg. She was only 14 years old at the time.
And what makes this case stand out, beyond the awful tragedy itself, is the verdict. In September of 2024, a Rankin County jury found her guilty. Guilty of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and tampering with evidence.
And the sentence that followed was 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 10 years.
That sentence it's just so striking for a juvenile, and it immediately makes you ask, how does that happen? What's the legal framework in Mississippi that allows a 14-year-old to be tried as an adult for these kinds of crimes?
Right. How does that transfer happen?
Well, in Mississippi, it's largely automatic in these situations. If a juvenile is charged with a crime that could carry a life sentence or the death penalty, like first-degree murder, they can be transferred directly to circuit court. It's not really up to a judge's discretion at that point. It's just procedural.
So the moment those charges are filed, the stakes are raised to the absolute maximum.
Exactly. And to really understand how the prosecution got that conviction, we have to look beyond just the day of the murder. We need to understand the family dynamics, the struggles, the history leading up to that day.
Okay, so let's unpack that background and, set the scene. Ashley Nicole Smiley, born in 1983, was a dedicated math teacher at Northwest Rankin High School. By all accounts, a real pillar of her community.
A symbol of stability.
And her personal life was centered in Brandon, Mississippi. Her husband, Heath Smiley, was a physical therapist, and his office was only about 5 minutes from their home. So you get this sense of a very tightly knit family structure.
And their daughter, Carly, born in 2009, actually attended the same high school where her mother taught, which means they were in close proximity all day, every day, at school and at home.
And the sources also mention just a deeply sad detail. Ashley actually had 2 daughters, but one had passed away when she was young. The sources don't really elaborate on that, but you can't ignore that this family had already been through an immense tragedy long before this.
And when we focus on Carly Madison Gregg specifically, the sources show that this picture of a stable household was, it was strained. There were some very serious underlying behavioral and mental health challenges.
So this wasn't something that came out of nowhere. The family was actively trying to manage these issues.
Right, exactly. The sources document a history of tension between Carly and her mother. For example, her cell phone had been taken away as a punishment. It suggests this ongoing pattern of conflict over behavior and rules.
And it went beyond typical teenage issues.
Oh, much further. She had been transferred from a previous school for bringing a Swiss Army knife to campus. And that's not a small thing. That's a serious breach of school safety. And it points to issues with impulse control, maybe self-regulation, or something deeper. It was a clear signal of instability long before the violence occurred.
And on top of these disciplinary problems, there was also the issue of substance use.
Yes. Heath Smiley, the stepfather, he testified that Carly had a history of drug use, and he suggested it might have been influenced by her biological father's own struggles with drugs. Now, that's not an excuse for her actions, obviously, but it does provide some critical family context.
And were they getting her any help for these issues?
They were. The family was proactive. The sources mentioned they tried equine-assisted therapy, which is a specialized kind of therapy for anxiety and behavioral problems. And crucially for the trial later, she was on medication. This medication was linked in testimony to symptoms like dissociation, mood swings, and even auditory hallucinations. This whole history, the therapy, the medication, the drug use, it became the absolute bedrock of the insanity defense.
So you have this really volatile mix of factors all simmering under the surface. And then on the afternoon of March 19th, Something specific happens that makes it all boil over.
The sources are very clear on this. That afternoon, one of Carly's friends went to Ashley Smiley and told her that Carly was hiding a large amount of contraband in her bedroom. And this wasn't minor stuff. We're talking a large quantity of cannabis, e-cigarettes, and multiple burner phones.
Wow. And for a mother to find that out from her daughter's friend.
It's a catastrophic breach of trust. It's the culmination of all these disciplinary issues they'd been facing. The sources strongly imply this discovery led to a major confrontation between Ashley and Carly, and that confrontation became the trigger for the violence that followed almost immediately. This was the point of no return.
Okay, let's move into the events of the attack itself, starting with the hours right before that confrontation. The day, March 19th, began pretty normally. Ashley and Carly went to school together. Heath went to work.
But even at school that day, the sources indicate that Carly was showing signs of pretty significant distress. Witnesses described her as grumpy, irritable, she couldn't focus, and importantly, there was testimony she experienced a memory blank during the day.
Which the defense later used to argue she was dissociating.
Exactly. The defense saw it as a break from reality. The prosecution, on the other hand, argued it was just anger about being caught or maybe the effects of her drug use. Either way, her state of mind was clearly unstable when they left school.
They got home at 3:54 p.m. And amazingly, Ashley was still trying to maintain some normalcy. She texted Heath about going grocery shopping.
That text is just a heartbreaking detail. It suggests she was either trying to downplay the fight she'd just had with Carly, or maybe just trying to push past it and get back to her routine. But within minutes of her sending that text, the violence started.
And the murder itself happened very quickly, with the details captured by the family's own security cameras.
Yes, the timeline from the trial is precise. At about 4 p.m., Carly went into her parents' bedroom. She retrieved Ashley's .357 Magnum handgun from under the mattress.
So she knew exactly where the gun was.
Knew where it was, knew how to access it. This detail was huge for the prosecution in arguing premeditation. The CCTV footage was instrumental. It showed her moving through the house and the garage and dining areas with the gun hidden behind her back.
Actively concealing it.
Actively concealing it. The prosecution used that footage to show intent, to show deliberation. She was hiding the murder weapon right before she used it. Then the footage captures the confrontation. 3 gunshots, screaming. The shots hit Ashley's skull. The sources note the wounds were fatal, but she didn't die instantly. Her death occurred in the minutes right after the shooting.
And that period of time, those few minutes between the shots and Ashley's death, is where the prosecution found some of its most powerful evidence against the insanity defense. What did Carly do in those moments?
After the shooting, she went back to the kitchen, still hiding the gun. And what she did next was a series of actions that the prosecution argued proved she was fully aware of what she'd done.
The text message.
The text message, it's the most chilling detail. She took her mother's phone and texted her stepfather, Heath, pretending to be Ashley. The text said something like, "Are you almost home, honey?" This act, done while her mother was dying just feet away, was basically irrefutable proof for the jury that she understood the consequences and was trying to manage the situation.
If you're truly psychotic and detached from reality, as the defense claimed, you don't craft a deceptive text message to lure someone to the scene.
Medically, it's highly improbable, and the deception didn't end there.
Right. She contacted a friend. She invited someone over.
Which is just another layer of this calculated behavior. She texts a friend, invites them to the house, and the friend arrives shortly after. There is now a third person in the house, with the crime scene fresh. This led to probably the most damning piece of evidence the prosecution presented.
The question she allegedly asked the friend.
Yes. The prosecution claimed she sent a message to this friend asking, "Are you squeamish around dead bodies?"
Yeah.
Whether that was a text or something she said, the prosecution's introduction of that statement was devastating. It suggests a complete and morbid awareness of what she had done, and it just completely erodes any argument that she didn't know the nature of her actions.
And all of this was setting the stage for Heath Smiley's arrival.
Heath got home at 5:03 p.m., so about 49 minutes after he received that deceptive text from Ashley. As soon as he opened the front door, he was ambushed. Carly opened fire with a .357 Magnum. Multiple shots were fired.
And he was hit.
He was. One bullet struck him in the trapezius muscle in his shoulder. It missed his face by less than 6 inches. It was an incredibly close call.
But even after being shot, he managed to fight back.
He did. His response was immediate. He was able to wrestle the gun away from her while the remaining bullets were fired during the struggle. It's an act that almost certainly saved his own life.
And what's really complex is Heath's own perspective on that struggle.
It is. The sources note that he described Carly as screaming, and he said he believed she was terrified. He even suggested in his testimony that he might not have been her intended target, that maybe she was just lashing out in a panic after he walked in. That testimony gave the defense a small window of emotional complexity to work with, even as the physical evidence pointed to a premeditated ambush.
And after he disarmed her, she fled.
Immediately, ran out the back door. The garage CCTV caught her running towards the street, and notably, she was with the friend she had invited over. And that brings us to the next phase, the immediate aftermath and the investigation.
Okay, so Heath is injured, he's just disarmed Carly, and she's fled the house. He then searches the home, finds his wife deceased, and calls the police. Carly was found nearby shortly after that and was arrested without any resistance.
And you have to imagine the chaos of that scene. The sources say Heath was completely unaware that Carly's friend had been in the house during the entire thing. He's dealing with his own injury, with this immense trauma. It was just a scene of total disarray.
And this is where the legal and logistical issues with the evidence start to pop up, specifically around those CCTV cameras.
Yes, and this speaks directly to the tampering with evidence charge. In the day or two after the murder, Heath Smiley retrieved the garage CCTV cameras himself. His intent, clearly, was to help the police. He offered the cameras to them.
But the police warned him against it.
They did. Investigators told him that by retrieving the evidence himself, he could actually be charged with tampering. It's an astounding interaction. The victim, grieving and injured, is essentially threatened with charges for trying to help.
It just highlights how rigid the rules are around evidence handling, the chain of custody.
Exactly. Any handling by a civilian, even the victim's spouse, can compromise its integrity in court. After that warning, Heath hired a lawyer and stopped talking to investigators. His driver's license was even temporarily confiscated. It just shows how tense and complicated the situation became almost immediately.
And then there was the even stranger issue of the missing camera.
This is an incredible detail. During the investigation, police realized another CCTV camera was missing. It was later found inside the family's refrigerator.
In the refrigerator?
In the refrigerator. The sources say Heath consented to them examining it, but of course the evidence on it was immediately compromised. They were concerned the cold temperatures could have damaged the memory card or the storage. It raises so many questions. Who put it there? Was it Carly trying to hide evidence?
The prosecution must have argued it was her.
They did. The fact that the tampering with evidence charge stuck suggests the jury believes she put it there. And legally, like the deceptive text message, it's another powerful piece of evidence showing consciousness of guilt. It proves she knew what she did was wrong and was trying to cover it up.
So with the evidence, mostly secured, the case moves pretty quickly toward a trial.
A very public trial.
The trial, State of Mississippi v. Carly Gregg, started on September 16th, 2024. And the prosecution began with a huge emotional impact.
The very first thing the jury heard was the recording of Heath Smiley's 911 call. Just hearing the voice of the injured victim, in that moment of shock and anguish describing finding his wife. Its tactic designed to immediately ground the jury in the horror of the crime.
And given the nature of the case, the defense was worried about all the media attention?
They were. They requested the trial be closed to the public and the media. They argued that as a juvenile tried as an adult, she couldn't possibly get a fair trial with that level of publicity.
But the judge disagreed.
He did. Judge Dewey Arthur ruled firmly against it. He cited a 2005 Mississippi Supreme Court precedent that supports media presence in the courtroom. He stated the trial must be open, public, and fair, so every detail became part of the public record.
The trial then quickly got into the witness testimony. Day 2 was Heath Smiley.
Right. He gave his detailed account of the events of March 19th. The text, the ambush, the struggle. Then on day 3, the defense presented its case.
And their entire strategy rested on the insanity defense.
The whole thing. Their key witnesses were Heath, recalled for his nuanced perspective, the minor friend who was there, and the linchpin, a psychiatrist named Dr. Andrew Clark. His job was to convince the jury that Carly's mental state met the legal definition of insanity.
And then on day 4, the state presented its rebuttal.
And it was a powerful, comprehensive rebuttal. They called a psychiatric nurse practitioner, Olivia Lieber, a counselor, Rebecca Kirk, and 2 forensic psychiatric specialists, Dr. Jason Pickett and Dr. Amanda Gugliano. The sources make it clear that their testimony directly and forcefully conflicted with Dr. Clark's conclusions. And that conflict of experts became the absolute heart of the trial.
Okay, let's get into that conflict because it all comes down to a very specific and very high legal bar, the Knighton rules.
This is where it gets into pure legal analysis, and it's so important for you to understand this. The bar for an insanity defense in Mississippi is incredibly high. They use the Knighton rules, which go all the way back to 1843. Basically, these rules test whether a defendant can be held criminally responsible based on their mental state at the exact moment of the crime.
And there are two specific criteria that have to be met, right?
Two criteria. First, did the person have a previously diagnosed mental disorder? For Carly Gregg, that was easy, yes. She had diagnoses of clinical depression and adjustment disorder. That part was not in dispute.
But the second part is the real hurdle.
It's the almost insurmountable hurdle. The second criterion is whether the person understood the nature and the quality of their actions. It's basically the did they know right from wrong test. The defense had to prove that Carly was so detached from reality that she didn't understand that firing a gun at her mother would kill her, or that killing her mother was wrong.
So how did the defense expert, Dr. Clark, try to make that case?
Dr. Clark testified that on that day, Carly had an acute mental health crisis. He argued it was caused by a newly prescribed medication, an SSRI antidepressant. He claimed this new medication destabilized her, causing the auditory hallucinations and dissociation.
But his argument fell apart during cross-examination.
It did, and in a crucial way. The prosecutor got Dr. Clark to make a devastating admission. Despite all his testimony about her mental state, Dr. Clark agreed. He concurred that Carly had knowingly attempted to cover up the murder by sending that text from her mother's phone.
And that admission is fatal to an insanity defense.
It's the legal kiss of death under Knighton. If you try to cover something up, it means you know it was wrong. And once he admitted that, the defense was essentially invalidated.
And the state's experts must have just hammered that point home.
They did. Their strategy was to acknowledge her mental health struggles, but completely demolish the claim of legal insanity. The nurse practitioner, Olivia Lieber, confirmed the diagnoses. But critically, she testified that in one of her appointments, Carly denied having auditory hallucinations.
So a direct contradiction.
A direct contradiction. Why tell the defense expert one thing and your treating practitioner another? It created a major credibility problem.
And the state's forensic specialist dug even deeper.
Dr. Jason Pickett's analysis was exhaustive. He reviewed her text messages, her journal entries, which he called theatrical and concerning. He was trying to build a picture of someone who was emotionally volatile, not someone in a psychotic break.
And he also addressed the medication argument directly.
Head on. He analyzed the specific antidepressant she was on, escitalopram, and his expert conclusion was that the prescribed dose was not the cause of the crimes. The state used this to argue her actions weren't a drug-induced psychosis, but were driven by anger and other factors.
So the inconsistencies in her story about hallucinations were a major issue.
A cornerstone of the state's case. She denied them to some, but then told Dr. Gugliano she heard voices as a young child. The prosecution used this to paint her claims as unreliable, maybe even fabricated for the trial.
And what was Dr. Pickett's final conclusion?
His conclusion basically sealed the outcome. Dr. Pickett stated that Carly Gregg did not meet Mississippi's legal definition of insanity on March 19th. He said the evidence, especially the cover-up attempts, proves she knew the nature, the quality, and the wrongfulness of her actions. Once that testimony was on the record, the guilty verdict was almost a foregone conclusion.
With the insanity defense completely off the table, the jury's decision became much more straightforward. But before they delivered that verdict, Carly Gregg made a critical decision about a plea deal.
A very high-stakes decision. The prosecution offered her a deal. She could plead guilty to her mother's murder and serve a single 40-year sentence. And in exchange, the attempted murder and tampering charges would be dropped completely.
A 40-year sentence still offers some hope of release one day.
Exactly. It provides a path out of prison later in life. Judge Arthur made sure she understood the alternative. If found guilty by the jury, life without parole was almost certain. And yet, she declined the deal.
And just days later, that decision became permanent. On September 20, 2024, the jury went into deliberations.
And they came back after just 2 hours, which is remarkably fast given the complexity. The verdict was guilty on all 3 counts: first-degree murder, attempted murder, and tampering with evidence.
And the sentencing was just as swift.
Judge Arthur took just 1 more hour. He sentenced her to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus the concurrent 10-year sentence. The sources confirm she's now incarcerated in the Youthful Offender Unit at the Central Mississippi Correctional Facility.
And even though the trial is over, the legal fight is far from finished. The defense immediately started the appeal process.
Yes, just 6 days after the verdict, her attorneys filed an appeal, calling the trial unjust. The state responded in October, and that kicked off the long appellate process.
And since then, there have been some new developments.
There have. She has new legal counsel now, an attorney named James Murphy, and he's already publicly called the sentence for a 15-year-old a harsh penalty. This signals a strategic shift, focusing less on the facts of the crime and more on whether it's constitutional to sentence a juvenile to life without parole.
And that appeal will take a long time to be heard.
A very long time. The sources estimate about 18 months before the Mississippi Supreme Court even hears the case. We're looking well into 2026.
And the most recent update in the sources introduces a major new argument for that appeal.
It does. In July of 2025, her new lawyer, Murphy, requested an extension to prepare his appeal brief. And his reason was that he was citing alleged misconduct by her previous trial attorney, Bridget Todd. This raises the possibility of an ineffective assistance of counsel claim, which, if proven, could potentially lead to a whole new trial. So that has now become a central issue in the ongoing appeal.
So we've really traced the facts, the psychological arguments, and the legal framework of this case. It seems so clear that the verdict ultimately came down to the prosecution proving that her actions were calculated.
Absolutely. If you were to summarize the key points from the sources, it all revolves around her intent. The discovery of the contraband was the trigger, but it was the calculated actions that followed, getting the specific weapon, hiding it, sending that deceptive text, inviting a friend over. When you measure those actions against the Knighton rules, you can see why the jury was convinced she knew right from wrong. And the final nail in the coffin was the defense's own expert having to admit that she tried to cover it up.
This case really does force you to confront the difficult intersection of juvenile mental health and the adult justice system.
It does. And that brings us to a final question for you to think about. Based on everything in these sources, we have this clear conflict in expert testimony about Carly Gregg's mental state. We know she declined a plea deal that offered a future chance at freedom, and now we have this ongoing appeal that's citing misconduct by her own lawyer. So the question is, what are the long-term societal implications when a young offender who is struggling with these documented mental health challenges chooses to risk and then receives a permanent adult sentence of life without parole? This case is just a stark example of the rigid legal definition of intent clashing head-on with the very messy reality of adolescent mental illness.
Thank you for joining us for this examination of the sources provided on the case of Carly Madison Gregg. We hope it's given you a clear, fact-based understanding of this timeline, the legal strategies, and the appeals process that continues to unfold.
We appreciate you focusing on this information with us.
Thanks for listening.